Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Etiquettes of Salaat, Part 10. First Discourse, Chapter 9. Traditions on the focus of the heart. Now, in this chapter, I won't take too much of your time. There's just a number of traditions that have been mentioned. All of the traditions have one agenda in mind, and that's for us to understand that the value of Salaat, this book's called Adab Salaat, the value of Salaat, is in proportion to the degree of your attentiveness to Allah, and it will be accepted to that in proportion to the extent and in proportion to how much you were attentive to Allah when you were doing Salaat. Now in this book, it's called Etiquettes of Salaat. It's teaching you the etiquettes that you have to practice during Salaat. These are esoteric etiquettes. Most esoteric etiquettes have one agenda in mind, one objective in mind. That's ul-qalb, focus of the heart. Now, since one's Salaat, its value, spiritual value, is proportional to one's attentiveness to Allah, which is the station of qalb, being attentive to Allah, and since one's attentiveness to Allah is proportional to one's focus of the heart, hudoor ul-qalb, Imam, in the last chapter, and in this chapter, in the last chapter it was a bit descriptive, in this chapter he's bringing traditions. What he wants to do is he wants to just highlight the importance, once and for all, before delving into giving practical instructions on how to acquire focus of the heart. You see, he's going through the steps. He could have given all the practical instructions from the very beginning. But what use would that have been if you weren't aware of the importance of it? So I think this is why Imam has gone through almost 9 chapters and one introduction. And in this first discourse, which comprises 12 chapters, he's now almost gone through 5/6 of it. And at the very end, now he wants to give the practical instructions. Why? Because he wants to make sure everyone is now understanding one another on the same wavelength here. The frequency is uniform. All this was to explain hudoor ul-qalb, its importance, its definition, its significance. Now here in this chapter, if the brothers and sisters, they can just go through the chapter and read the traditions, but I'll just go through a few of them here. But I don't have anything particular to say. Everything is in that one chapter, and it's as if, even with the first tradition, Imam has given a small commentary to that too. And these things, may come later on in more depth, because he does touch upon muraqabah to some extent, and this muraqabah is similar to Allah Tabois. Anyway, the Holy Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that worship Allah as if you're seeing Allah, seeing Him. And if you don't see Him, verily He, Allah, is seeing you. Now this is a prophetic tradition, very important, and the Urafa have extrapolated loads and tons of delicate, minute details in relation to this holy tradition. This is the importance of it. Here, 2 stages of focus of the heart are extrapolated from this tradition. In the first clause, Imam says the traveller, the salik, is witnessing the divine manifestations of Allah, and the ears of the heart are closed from all else. There's no distraction. They're seeing Allah in play. They're seeing Allah in dimension. Not with the physical eye either. The eyes of the heart are opened up to Allah's beauty. Chapter 215. فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Whichever way you turn, there's the face of Allah. They've reached this level. Worship Allah like that, as if you're seeing Him. Amir al-Mu'mineen never worshipping Allah that he doesn't see. Now in short, Imam says one is occupied with the all-present, the hadir. The salik is occupied in this first phrase with the all-present, annihilated in Him, whilst neglecting the stations of hudoor and mahdar, neglecting the stations of being in the presence of Allah. So, for example, sometimes X loves Y so much that whatever he sees and wherever he goes, he sees Y. And in Muslim poetry, they use the names of Layli and Majnoon to portray this reality, where Majnoon, the male, who's in love with Layli being that symbolic of divine love, wherever Majnoon would go, whatever Majnoon would see, he would witness Layli. So that intense love that he had for her. But sometimes someone acknowledges that wherever he's going, Y is seeing him. Let's say, for example, wherever you're going, you know that through a GPS system or through a camera system, you're always being looked at. That's one kind of presence. But that's different than you being annihilated in Allah and being totally neglecting any camera or any GPS or anything. No, you're nothing to do with that. You're not even bothered whether someone's watching over you. You're annihilated in Him now. These are two different stages. And in the second clause is that mahdariya idea, being in the presence of Allah, which is shown. Because if you don't see Allah, verily Allah is seeing you. He's watchful over you. This station is lower in degree than the first station. Because here one acknowledges that one is in the presence of Allah and that Allah is watchful over one without actually having that intuitional presence before Allah, without seeing with the non-physical eye, seeing with the eyes of the heart. No, you're not seeing anything with the eyes of the heart, but you're very attentive that Allah is watchful over you. And this attentiveness has degrees. You can be very attentive. And if that attentiveness can reach a threshold where you don't sin at all, because you're constantly, severely attentive that Allah is watchful over you, and you're constantly recalling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Holy Messenger is encouraging us to execute the first clause. That's what Islam is all about, seeing. That's the aim. Allah wants us to see. The Holy Messenger wants us to see. Otherwise, how can we get to know Him? It's not an academic knowing. That won't suffice. We want to know Him. So He's encouraging us to execute the first clause, but even if we're not able to acquire this first clause in seeing, it's as if the Holy Prophet is saying, at least don't be neglectful in relation to the fact that you're being watched over. At least have that. Now, in the presence of Allah too, there are etiquettes. Etiquettes whose negligence can distance you from true servitude. So that those etiquettes always have to be abided by. And he gives one example here of one of the fourth Imam's disciples narrates seeing the fourth Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, in Salat, and then during the Salat, Imam Sajjad's cloak falls or slips a bit without the Imam trying to straighten it up. And then after the Salat, on being asked as for the reason why Imam didn't do anything, the Imam replied, "Woe upon you! Do you know in whose presence I was in?" Now this was an answer the fourth Imam gave to the disciple based on the disciple's understanding. The Imam could have gone much deeper in why he didn't straighten it up. But he sufficed with the mahdari dimension, being in the presence of Allah, appreciating that Allah is watchful over you. He sufficed with that. Otherwise, the Imam is, in unity with awareness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he said, look, do you know whose presence you are? And you're thinking of straightening it up? You have to be totally absorbed in Him. Another tradition then Imam mentions from the Holy Messenger, who said, 2 people of my ummah stand in prayer, carrying out the sujood and ruku equally on the outside. Externally they're doing the same things. Whilst on the inside, the difference between the salats are tantamount to the difference between the heavens and the earth. They look exactly the same. But what is being ingrained in the heart is totally different. One is very spiritual, one is very lowly. The difference between the heavens and the earth. You see why? Because one has hudoor-qalb. That hudoor-qalb allowing one to be constantly attentive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To make that salat a true salat. You're you have focus of the heart. That focus isn't compromised. If it's like that, your salat will be much different to someone who has no focus of the heart during one's prayer. Once I asked Ayatollah Bahjat, rahmatullah alayh, I said, for a beginner like me, how many times should I recite the formula of Nabi Yunus a day? Because I heard that some people say 400, some 700, some people 1,000, and there are different numbers that are given. Ayatollah Bahjat, he said, whether you're a beginner or advanced in spiritual wayfaring, it doesn't matter. The criterion is hudoor ul-qalb. Because here the same, like with salat, when you keep on reciting invocations, as long as there's hudoor ul-qalb, you'll benefit from them. Otherwise, they're spiritless. The difference between the heavens and the earth. In another prophetic tradition, it said, will one not be afraid if one lifts one's head in salat and his face becomes that of a donkey's face? You have so little focus of the heart. It's minimal, it's almost non-existent, that you have the potential that your focus can be even lower than animals, or that on a par with animals. But we know from the logic of the Quran, it can be even worse. Aren't you afraid? Aren't you embarrassed when you do a salat and after the salam, you don't even remember anything? Be a bit embarrassed. It requires shame sometimes, the way some people do salat. In another prophetic tradition, one who executes a 2-unit prayer whilst totally inattentive in relation to the dunya, so this is good now. The focus of the heart is so strong that you are now totally inattentive in relation to the dunya. If you do 2 units of prayer totally inattentive, what's the result? One's sins will be forgiven. Yes, if you're truly inattentive, of course it will be. When you see yourself in the presence of Allah, with that kind of recalling Allah, it will have such an effect inside. It will be ingrained in the heart in such a manner, of course you'll be prevented from sinning. That inner light has grown now. You see, and all these traditions that follow, the listener can now read for themselves. I don't want to just recite because I'll just be repeating the same old thing. Here though, all these traditions, they're all pointing to the same thing, that the value of salat is in proportion to the degree of your attentiveness to Allah, and it will be accepted according to that extent. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله